Hey everybody, this is Matthew. Welcome back to our Contracts 101 session with the NVAR forms. And this particular form is going to be the Buyer's Limited Access to Premises Agreement. Now, this is a fantastic form, and it is probably, in my opinion, the most underrated and unknown form in the entire library. The intention of this form is to give access to a buyer who isn't taking occupancy but is doing other things and protect the seller and the buyer from liability issues, to be explicit in what they're allowed to do and when they are allowed to do it. And so it has a great deal of protection for your clients and certainly for us as practitioners. A reminder back, if you go back and watch the video of the core contract, the access to property clause allows the representatives of the buyer there for specific purposes and only specific people, surveyors and appraisers and home inspectors, if there's a home inspection contingency under that qualification. And then it says 7 days prior to closing, you have the right to do as many walkthrough inspections as you wish. But those walkthrough inspections are to inspect work that's been done, quality of the home, to ensure it matches what it was like before. What happens often is that the buyer to the home inspection, where the home inspector is permitted in and they do their thing, and then the buyer wants to bring a contractor in to look at the work later or to re-inspect it, or the buyer wants to put their furniture in the house, and again, they don't need to occupy, but they just need somewhere to store it, and it's better in that home they're intending to buy than in a storage place and moving 2 or 3 times. And so what happens is the agents default to we'll just give you a pre-occupancy agreement. You can move your crap in, you can take occupancy, you can be in the house like a tenant, and that's not always what's needed. And also an easy counter for that, when a buyer calls up and says, hey, can we move in early? We're trying to make all of our dates work out, and we don't want stuff in storage, and it's too expensive to move twice. A much easier thing to do is to say, look, we're going to do the buyer's limited access agreement. You can put all your stuff in the garage and in the garage only, or in the basement or wherever you want it. And you need to stay in a hotel for a night or two to get all your stuff coordinated, because we don't want to give you keys and access to the home to live there. And then something happens at closing where you don't move forward, and now we're all screwed and we got all these other issues to deal with and evictions and all the rest. So this is a great compromise document. And it's also good for all the other little things that want to be done. So let's go through quickly. The buyer's access to premises agreement, pretty simple information. The day that you made this agreement, the buyer and seller's name, and in the property, hopefully you have that information. And then the buyer's request and the seller grants limited access to this property on, this is the date that they're going to be allowed to enter the property. Not the day you did the agreement, the day they're allowed to enter the property. And then they're going to have this next paragraph to allow the buyer to measure rooms or window openings and to show property to buyers, contractors, decorators, or suppliers, buyers' representatives. Notice here how specific this is: to measure a room, to check for windows, window openings, to show it to contractors or decorators, maybe even family members. There's a reason why there's a form for those things. Your client is not permitted, your buyer is not permitted in that house to do these things without some express agreement. The contract does not, in and of itself, give that agreement. You need an addendum. Or you could do it if the buyer was paying for repairs or painting or something prior to closing they wanted done. This form would work for that. So we're going to say, okay, we're going to let the buyer in. And then it says no work is to be performed on the property by any buyer representative unless authorized by the seller in writing. Yes, we want to agree to that too. To allow the buyer to deliver furniture and other personal property of the buyer's limited to delivery of the personal property below. And it could be, all property. This is hard to do with a tablet. In whatever. And then where are they allowed to put it? And so garage. Okay, so that's it. They can put all their personal belongings in their garage, except no hazardous, illegal, flammable materials or firearms can be left at the property by the buyer. So that's already in there by default. The other terms here we're considering is that all furniture, everything that's being left, this is basically your limited liability paragraph right here. This whole paragraph is basically saying buyer, you can leave this stuff, but I, the seller, I'm not responsible for it. If something happens to it, that's on you. If the house gets broken into, if it floods, if it catches on fire, that's all on you. I'm not going to be responsible for your stuff. It's a hold harmless statement. And the buyer also warrants that no one is going to damage the house and no one can enter the house without the seller's consent. And we get that from over here, knowingly or unknowingly to property. And if any damage occurs, anything to bring it back to its original condition is going to be held up in escrow, or deducted from the escrow. So that's already all in here to protect your seller. And there's a statement here that says, buyer's not allowed to occupy the property or take possession. This is only the right to access the property to leave things in certain areas. Okay, and then the paragraph 4 is a pretty good one too. So the settlement, if settlement doesn't occur for whatever reason, by default, this agreement actually says that the buyer has 15 days to get things out. I think that's a long time. I usually will use about 10 days, maybe even 7 days. A week is usually enough to make arrangements to get that stuff moved out of there. So you do whatever you want to do in there, but I do think that this 15 days is a really long time. So if after 15 days, the buyer hasn't gotten their stuff out of the house, then guess what? The seller can do what they want with it. They can take ownership of it. They can throw it away. It's just done. So this is, if the buyer wants to leave stuff in the house, they should do it under the seller's terms. The seller should have terms protecting their interest. And then this says, everything else in the contract stays in effect. So if you want additional terms, and let's say the buyer does have right to paint. So buyer may paint. Ooh, this is horrible on a tablet. Buyer may paint living room. Be specific as to what. It needs to be painted in there and then leave it at that. So if there's repairs to be done, you're probably going to want an escrow. You're going to want additional terms of say an escrow to be held in the amount of $5,000 for knocking down a wall in the kitchen, which would be crazy to do before closing, but whatever you do. So anyways, this is your buyer's limited access form. It is to be used anytime the buyer is accessing the property outside of the access to property paragraph in the contract, which is almost anything other than prescribed inspections. And it has all these protections for your clients. So hopefully you will use that, use it well, use it often. It's a great form and it's a good compromise to the pre-occupancy agreement. Thanks so much.